year. And it just goes to show how important sustainability is to Delta, and I think the aviation industry in general. And on behalf of Delta, just want to thanks for being able to join here. And my title is Global Sales Manager of Sustainability. And a lot of people ask me, what does that even mean? Sustainability in sales, right? So there's a lot of people behind the scenes that work at Delta to support corporate customers, agency, all different folks on education on what sustainability is. At the core of where we can start is helping people understand what sustainability means and what sustainability means to travel. So education is everything, and how it relates to our industry. It's our job to educate our customers, what we're doing, what the aviation industry is doing in the sustainability space. But beyond education is how we plan to make programs available so companies that work with us, our customers, can get involved and drive the change the industry needs. Some truths that we really believe in at Delta: that one, climate change is real. So that's number one. Number two, our world and our industry will be changed forever going forward when it comes to what's going on with climate change and sustainability. And three, Delta wants to lead the aviation sector in finding those solutions and to reduce our carbon footprint, eventually, hopefully, to zero. Sustainability is going to be a core pillar of everything we do, from being the first and only carbon neutral global airline in the world to partnering with global corporates and agency customers on something maybe we covered today, a little sustainable aviation fuel, but also recently taking huge steps, which I'm really passionate about, eliminating single-serve plastics from our operation. And there's so much more that we can do. And I really hope that everyone on this call can be part of that journey. So thanks so much for having me, and thanks for the time.
Thank you so much for that intro, Jerry, sharing that with us. So we also have some other panelists with us today that we want to bring forward. Jason Gruman. Many of you may know him. He is a senior value delivery consultant with the Value Experience team focused on the public sector for SAP Concur. In his role, Jason's assisting customers by creating and delivering value-based engagements to help recognize opportunities for optimization and program growth. Prior to his role at SAP Concur, many of you may know this, he served as an assistant vice president and director of business and energy at a university in Tulsa, Oklahoma. His background includes information technology, travel management, finance, and sustainability. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, glad to be here.
Wonderful. We also have Bella Moreno, who is the product lead for Event Cloud at Cvent. Bella has been with Cvent for 5 years. Cvent is an industry-leading technology provider for event management and hospitality solutions. As a product lead, she focuses on event marketing, organizational problem spaces, and innovation in development and design of solutions to better promote and execute events. And data-centric mindset, which we love about you, Bella. We love our data. Prior to her career with Cvent, Bella worked as a manager for Marriott International Hotel Operations. Been in the travel industry for a long time. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. We also have Claire Christensen. Welcome, Claire. Claire is the Global Sustainability Lead at Enterprise Holdings. Claire is the responsible for developing, managing, and measuring the impact of ESG initiatives. With more than 10 years experience in ESG, Claire has managed several legacy initiatives for Enterprise Holdings and also represents Enterprise Holding on the board of Global Travelers Association and the Nature Conservancy. Prior to joining Enterprise, Claire gained experience in ESG issues management through roles in the nonprofit and marketing sectors, as well as an environmental law firm. Great to have your perspective with us today as well, Claire. And finally, Kathleen Roberts. Kathleen Roberts is the Chief Revenue Officer for Christofferson Business Travel with 38 years of travel management experience. Kathleen thrives on consulting with clients to achieve more through people-first, technology-supported, managed travel programs. Kathleen, welcome. All right, so we're going to dive in and we're going to be asking our panelists some questions and bringing those forward. We would love for you to engage with us in the Q&A section of the webinar. We will answer as many questions as we can today, and if we can't get to them, we will follow up after the webinar with some answers for our audience on the SCTM site. All right, wonderful. So Jason, let's kick off with you. Thinking about how would you recommend a university, a campus, initiate a sustainability office? What interactions do they need to have? How do they need to get started?
So I think the first important piece I would recommend is just start to figure out what your university's goal is as it relates to sustainability, right? Everyone can form an office and really get interaction across facilities, finance, procurement, IT. Basically, every department really has a way that they can impact sustainability. And as far as starting a sustainability office, I think, again, the most important part is who's willing to take a lead. Is there a person that's going to have to wear an existing hat, right? Which is so common in higher education. We all take on roles and responsibilities because we're passionate about them. But to form a formal office, you really want to make sure you have buy-in from your trustees, from your legislative areas, if you're working on a state institution, right, a public institution. For those in a private perspective, you want to make sure your trustees are behind you, that your president's office is committed, that you have commitments from core leadership before you go out and just try to, start up an office. And a lot of the time that takes a roadshow, right? And showing what your campus should be proud of, right? So many of us probably do have some form of sustainability office. And sometimes you probably feel like you're drowning in data and drowning trying to get movement in certain topics. So it does take a little bit of time to get progress and momentum behind you. But those things are critical in really giving the sustainability office teeth, right? Is encouraging them to be out there, to work with various departments, and that it's really a campus initiative, not just a one-person initiative. And most importantly, get your students buy-in. When I was in higher education, that was the easiest way to get something done quickly, was to get the students to ask for it. And that, because they're the ones paying to attend, there is just so much power in having them ask and show that it's important to them.
And recognizing that generation's passion goes a long way. Wonderful point, Jason. Thank you. So we think about getting started. What are the ideas, tips on how to educate university travelers about these initiatives?
So that's where that's kind of an interesting question, Liz, right? At the end of the day, we are all tasked with trying to manage 1,000 different things. And the education piece is the one that's probably the hardest. People are typically stuck in their way, right? They don't necessarily want change. It's that, that black and white, I'm happy with the way things are. But to educate campus and educate staff and travelers and faculty and students, you just have to be consistent. And being consistent requires you having a program in place, having policies and procedures that are applied to everyone, come up with a way or a spin-off on your campus's motto or logo or color scheme. And I know there's several institutions that have added the word green, right? So whatever your campus was, for example, I don't know, go green, right? It was, Michigan State. I'm going to pick on Ed from Michigan State for a minute, right? BMSU green, right? That's how their campus brands their sustainability initiative. And it's more than just a department, right? It's a cultural, it's a way that the university tries to act in all of its behavior and all of its processes and the way it does business. And that goes a long way towards the overall education. And then related to travel and expense, be transparent, right? Show carbon emissions, make people recognize what they're booking and what the impact to the environment is, and educate people on alternatives. So there's a lot of different ways to educate travelers, and it really just coming down to knowing your constituents.
Wonderful. Surfacing it somewhat in the technology is viable too, right? To the extent that people can start to see the impact they're making when they're booking their travel, kind of that real just in time. We talk about that just in time impact on people's choices.
I'm going to put Liz on the spot here and ask her to share her screen. Actually, this is a great point to maybe tie this in, right? So a lot of the education really comes down to how can your campus consolidate and gather all of the data relating to your travel platform. And, obviously I work for SAP Concur, but one of the main, whatever your booking tool is, whatever your program allows, the thing that makes sustainability reporting difficult is you have to pull from probably 100 different places in order to get a true footprint of what is your campus doing. You've got meetings and events, you've got group travel, you've got international travel for study abroad, you've got athletics, you've got faculty going in research grants and living off of a boat in the middle of the Indian Ocean. How do you measure things like that, right? And so having one platform for booking and expensing all of your travel related and even potentially procurement related goods and services is what gives you a single place to go ask questions of your data, right? And so here's an example of a slide that we produce for our customers when they ask, what are the benefits of having an integrated travel and expense program? It's you've got your air, your personal car mileage, rail bookings, how many trips we're taking, and then, where is the alternative of how can you push plane to train, right? And then you got a 24-month snapshot. So this is just one example, but again, having an integrated platform where you can be transparent is how you can best educate your travelers, because if you can't report on what you're doing, you cannot share it with your campus.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you, Jason. We really appreciate that. One final question for you. What kinds of university goals for achieving carbon neutrality have you seen? And how do university travel programs fit into those?
A lot of campuses, president's office, and even from a regulatory perspective are being pushed to be green, right? University presidents have been signing the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, AUPCC, ACUPCC, which has a plan and it has a roadmap and it has a strategy on how to manage your different levels of emissions going forward over the next, I think it's 25 years, right? With a goal of being carbon neutral by X year, right? Your campus signs a commitment to that. And you see that, a lot of the time that is a top-down approach being pushed down onto campus. But a lot of the other times you see student-led approaches where students are coming forward to the university and saying, we want to attend a green institution. We don't want plastic bottles. We want to, have sustainable food choices, all of the, less paper being used, you go digital, have, no textbooks, right? So you're seeing so many different things being led by, legislative bodies, by student bodies, by university leadership, by faculty, by research grants. Sometimes all of those things play into how a campus is ultimately moving in a green way. And it's really organizing and formulating all of those thoughts to make progress as an institution, because if everybody's not moving in the same direction, sometimes it's easy to take one step forward and two steps back.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jason. Claire, I'm going to punch over to you. I have a couple questions, kind of a similar perspective, but curious what you would recommend to those just getting started in managing their sustainability initiatives.
So I think for enterprise holdings, especially, we have actually just reestablished advisory and executive councils and looking at all aspects of sustainability. So similar to what Jason had shared, whatever the vertical line of leadership looks like in your organization, there's always a horizontal approach where you're pulling in from internal resources in a variety of different teams, and then determine what goals or what the roadmaps will be in all of those different areas. So at Enterprise, we focus on 25, nice round number of ESG considerations that are shared across the organization. And the fact that over time, as you establish a baseline, that baseline will shift. So for Enterprise, we've actually just established like the next decade of reporting, and we work on 5-year targets for campuses. That might be a shorter timeline, it might be a longer timeline, dependent on the mission of the organization and where the campus is headed. And then I would just make a plug here, especially for the travel side of things through Global Business Travelers Association and other platforms. There are actually sustainability screening processes or platforms that share a little bit of those best practices, so you don't have to start from scratch. I think it's worth checking into external resources that will help gauge where you are based on some of these travel components and or broader implication to the business that will help establish the roadmap. And you don't have to create all of that effort yourself.
Wonderful. It's a great recommendation. Thank you, Claire. So if they've already gotten started, right? The folks out there who are not at ground zero, what are their next steps, ways to grow and expand better communication of the program?
So I think, so with the weight of, short-term prioritization to long-term planning, if you're constantly reevaluating where you are with your baseline, what we typically at Enterprise do is look at, out of those 5-year targets, you're looking at 2 years prior, 2 years within the program, and then where you are headed at least 2 years after. So I think, the effort is not necessarily done, or you might say, okay, we finished with those key performance indicators, but where are we headed for those next goals? I would say just weighing current dynamics within the company, and then also probably a lot of focus on how to approach that from a student/employee perspective, where for Enterprise, we have like a monthly calendar of things that ladder up to our broader initiatives to be able to share that internally. So you're looking at that as like a communications robust plan and effort in putting that forward. So that way, even as students and or employees, they see the visuals as far as the progress, but also serving as an ambassador for the messaging. So a student and or employee may or may not have the direct correlation to what the broader strategy would be. I may not be renting the vehicle myself, but at least I know that I'm contributing. If I'm doing this for myself here at home in terms of mitigating my environmental footprint, that's also supporting the company and vice versa. So somehow being able to establish that through your communications team's efforts that make that relevant. It doesn't necessarily have to be a daily reminder, but something along the lines that there's a steady cadence of sharing short-term, midterm, and long-term successes.
That's it. Communication, progress, transparency makes a big difference on getting from point A to point B. Fantastic. Great. All right. Thank you, Claire. We're going to shift over to you, Ms. Kathleen. We want to ask now that we've talked about how to get programs started, right? And how to kind of maintain them. And we looked at Jason's data slide. Okay. We know that reporting is one of the biggest challenges here. As Jason said, you're pulling from all sorts of places sometimes. However, what can be done with the reports that universities can receive from the travel suppliers, TMCs, the travel booking activities? And have you seen any of those results being communicated to the university community in a way that helps sustainability?
Great. Well, I think that is a great place to start. If you are using a travel management company, I would recommend becoming familiar with the reporting options. You might be surprised that some of the reports that you're already receiving today have CO2 data available. You might have been receiving those reports for quite some time, and if you haven't reviewed them, you might want to talk with your TMC to they just click a button and CO2 data can be added to so many of our standard reports. And so those are generally complimentary. You're already receiving them, and just be sure that any reports that provide the emissions, the CO2 fields, get that added. And then you start to have something to work with, that you can start that communication and have an awareness around, at least for those of you who have consolidated programs, you'll get a nice big picture. But even if you have only a portion of your travel with the TMC, they can start to give you some data points to work with. And certainly, as Jason mentioned, don't go at it alone. You definitely want to collaborate with other departments within your organization, especially things like finance and security and HR, as you try to escalate those communications. And then as you're doing so, aligning any new compliance that you want to add with other metrics that are important in your organization. Those might be things that you want to keep in mind, like duty of care, cost savings, traveler satisfaction, traveler safety. Also, as you look at how you're going to communicate and work towards these initiatives around sustainability.
Thank you. I've got one other question for you I'd like to punch at you. Are there methods that you have seen work that to promote your travel partners who have a major focus on sustainability?
Yes, so certainly all these things seem to keep coming back to communication. So you definitely need, your travelers need to be aware of who those preferred partners are, as well as your TMC. Your TMC can help you to promote those preferred partners and the reasons why, and help in that communication. There can be documentation on itineraries. There can be prompts within the online booking tool. Certainly you have that ability to indicate those as preferred vendors. Also, similar to your reporting, there are just simple triggers that a TMC can turn on within your program if they're made aware that you want CO2 data to show at the time of booking. And the online booking tools support this and can help in that way as well. And you'd be surprised how many times throughout the booking and ticketing process, if you're not already doing it, many of you are, but for those who aren't, there's many steps along the way in the booking process that your travelers would have that exposure to. This is a preferred vendor and this is the CO2 emissions. And then you can add in those prompt messages along the way throughout the booking process as well. And then also keep in mind that there can be at times a cost difference in your preferred vendor or through the preference towards sustainability. And you just need to be prepared to approve those costs if there is a cost difference and be aware of them within your program. That maybe you're selecting this hotel because of its sustainability efforts and it is slightly higher than another option nearby. Also, as you're choosing those preferred vendors and those preferred and for their sustainability efforts, to be sure that they do align with your travelers' requirements. You don't want to have pushback from your travelers that you've chosen this great sustainable hotel or other solution that doesn't meet their needs. So making sure that those align as well.
Yeah, I really love what you're saying there, Kathleen. The transparency that we've talked about before, but I know when I do some of my online shopping now, right, that they offer me these choices at the bottom. Do you want multiple shipments or do you want to be more sustainable and just have it all come in one shipment? You might have to wait a couple days longer for a couple things, right? But overall, we're going to say just the option being presented makes it so we're willing to choose that if it's important to us. So just being able to see it in the menu of booking your travel, the CO2 emissions, you know, the impact, that kind of transparency in your technologies really can go a long way in this whole method of communication, getting people to care, just showing them the option exists.
Yeah, that's
I didn't think about the impact. Yeah, I didn't think about the impact of 4 packages versus 1 until they put it on the page in front of me. And then I'm like, oh, I could choose
visual guilt. It's a very powerful thing, right? And so you may as well put that out in front of them and bring them in to that decision-making process.
Wonderful. Have you found anyone benefiting from not only that complimentary reporting that we get from the TMC, but any kind of paid consulting options? And is that something people need to bring their programs forward here?
You know, it's possible that you may. I mean, it depends where you're at in this process. It's a lot to understand and everyone's at different phases. And so you may be starting out with the simple reporting options that we've already talked about, but you may be ready for a deeper consultation. And there's a wealth of options around consulting on this topic. There's also good resources, as you saw, just from your existing vendors through the reports that are provided through you know, SAP, you just saw an example of airline reports and others. But when you get to the point where you're really needing an outside party to help bring this all together, in addition to third-party vendors, our industry has done a really good job, I feel like, of creating consulting around this. For example, we're an affiliate of BCD Travel, so we would use Advito's Gate 4 solution, but also American Express GBT has Green Compass And then the CWT Consulting Services also has their solutions around this. So our industry is very well engaged with this. And when you want to go into those deeper levels, the expertise is available, very focused on our industry.
Leverage those travel management company relationships, guys, in that partnership. There's a lot of wealth beyond just booking travel and having an agent help us switch a flight. So that's kind of the message I'm taking out of that, Kathleen. Thank you.
Yes, and I'm sure there are more that I haven't listed, but
I'm sure there are.
Yes,
but you're right. The industry is really leading the way in travel and sustainability and transparency and support there. So leverage that partnership. All right, we're going to shift gears just a little bit as we've been talking about business travel and sustainability initiatives. They work a little different when we're talking about events. We can come at them from a different angle. So Bella, let's jump in and talk about that. What does sustainability mean for event programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So if we think about event programs kind of as a microcosm of the larger thing that we're talking about here, tour and travel really goes hand in hand with the events that you're executing, whether they be virtual, hybrid, on-site. Universities have events just like everybody else does. So, when we're talking about being responsible executors of events, we do have to talk about the fact that attendees, and more specifically in this case, students, care about the way that you're executing your event programs. There was a recent study that said that about 60% of attendees prefer to attend a conference purely based on its sustainability efforts. I'd argue that for students, that number would actually be much higher. And I think that kind of dovetails really nicely from something that Jason said. Students these days, we are focusing on the things that they are shopping for, how they consume their food, what business decisions they're making, and they're being very intentional about it. So with events, we have to take kind of a top-down approach to looking at what we can do now that we've shifted back out of being virtual and people are coming back to this face-to-face, in-person, scenario that we saw beforehand. And really, we need to think about how crazy our consumption was, before we went to virtual and had sort of a level set of, wow, this is clearly we need to make a shift and make a change. That does fall really nicely into kind of three main buckets when we think about it. The first is something that Jerry said, which is first and foremost, single-use plastics. In 2019, the meetings and events industry started an initiative, the 20% Less initiative. And the goal was that every year for 5 years, meetings and events and event executors were going to commit to trying to do 20% less plastic for each consecutive year. When we went into the COVID era and we saw so many virtual events happening, that was a pin was kind of put in that. So now we're really needing to shift our focus, dive really way deeper into where we were supposed to be now in that 5-year plan. And rather than picking up where we left off, making more of an effort and an energy towards something like that. It also means, yes, thinking about sustainable first food options, like, maybe you do vegetarian or you scale back on the number of meals that you're serving at these events. But it also means being extremely intentional about attendance, and rather than, ordering your catering based off of the registration or the attendance numbers you're anticipating, thinking about doing day of counts instead. This is our most recent check-in information as of XYZ date and time. And that way you don't have this plethora of overshown food that is just extremely wasteful, that is difficult to quantify otherwise. And then the final kind of bucket would be really resources. And this is where event technology really comes into play. So thinking about the fact that nowadays in 2022, it is extremely easy to completely avoid any sort of paper material, printout, anything like that, especially when we're talking about students. You have the ability to put all of that online, on-demand content, downloadable, readable information right at their fingertips. There's not really an excuse to have to print things out. And that is one of the easiest things that can be done, that we push for and do ourselves as well. Is there's mobile apps, there's all different avenues that you can get this information into people's hands without needing to rely on the resources or the information from there. So yeah.
So I heard plastics, food, and paper.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does CVEN or organizations focus on getting those three down? Tips and tricks?
So the event technology is critical, like I said, and whether that means that you are intentionally scanning and checking people into whatever session is about to happen right before you have the breakout with all of this catering involved. You can certainly do that. There's also the mobile apps, like I mentioned, but it also involves being really smart about making sure that your Wi-Fi and your technology is on site to support a hybrid event endeavor. Maybe you don't need every single person to attend in person, and that way you're scaling back as much as possible on tour and travel and actual catering and things like that for the people that are attending.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Just switching from those plastic bottles on the table to the glass cups and
yes,
pour out, right?
Those bottles and ask them to bring them from home, right? People have water bottles, but people do love swag. So that's a very, very good thing to provide for them.
That was the next statement, right? Give them the swag, right? So you got your metal straw and you got your, water bottle that you're going to fill up over and over versus all the plastic. Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Bella. Very helpful. Jerry, we're going to come back to you to kind of wrap it up for today and go through some questions.
So easy going last. It's so easy. Because I have so much to share about what everyone said, especially just that events piece as well. But we'll go through the questions. I'll be good.
No, that's perfect. You can just jump on your monologue whenever you want to. I'm happy with that too. And I do have, Jerry, that example of reporting. So you let me know when you'd like me to show that to everyone.
Yeah.
The first question we had to jump off with you on, though, was, how do you recommend employees book travel? What kind of policies need to be in place to route them through the specific channels to bring this kind of thing? How does that benefit sustainability? How does it benefit the reporting?
Yeah, and I think we've covered it a little bit today already, right? And so it looks like you have to have some kind of integrated travel program that aligns the policy. So that means booking through specific channels, right? So is that your online booking tool? Is that directly with Christofferson and BCD? So really being attuned and if you can't enforce or at least encourage the utilization, as high as utilization to those specific channels as you can. And the reason I say that is because sustainability all starts with data. And, if we know where you're going, then we know what your footprint is going to be. And that's the first place that we can help. I can speak to Delta, a little bit to agency. I don't want to speak for Kathleen, but is if we have your footprint, if we know where you're going, we can calculate what your carbon emission footprint was from that travel. And if we can do that, then we can help you kind of downstream a little bit. With the calculation, and it'll honestly, it all starts there. And then a little bit to build on top of that is to have these direct relationships, have the direct relationship with agencies so they can help you understand from a high level what your footprint is, but also have that direct relationship with the airline. And there's actually a question in the Q&A that I wanted to get to from Timothy, actually, if you don't mind me reading that out. Elizabeth, in addition to TMC reporting, we have also received data directly from carriers, meaning, airlines. Do you know of any important distinctions between those sets of data? And have you had any success in getting hotel data? I'll leave that one outside of scope for me. But when you have a direct relationship with an airline, we have flown data. So it means that travel has gone through, and we can actually see what's been flown. And the reason that's so important is because we have fuel burn stats. And when you have fuel burn stats, we know exactly how much fuel a flight has burned on an annual basis, like from a route basis. And then we can tie that back to your travel program. So we can see how many segments you've done, and then we can take a proportion of all that fuel and allocate it to your program. And like I said, data is king. And if we have that fuel number, we can convert that to emissions, and then we can start talking about, that consultative approach. Does that mean you want to do something in offsets? Does that mean you could want to do something in sustainable aviation fuel and maybe future technologies to start addressing that footprint? So to sum it up, book within your channels, book with your agency, book with your OBT, and the more you book outside of policy, the less data, there's some leakage there when it comes to data.
Helpful. Thank you, Jerry.
You got it.
Kathleen, we'll give you a moment if you want to think about it, because I hadn't prepped you for that. But if you want to dive in on, is there a way to get at that hotel data? Something we're obviously curious minds want to know.
Hotel chains are doing a great job of making improvements. A lot is happening at the individual hotel level. And so that's why the reporting isn't as helpful, because you can see, you can get reports by specific hotel quite easily and see how many room nights you had there, but it's not going to give you like CO2 specific information in the reporting. However, when you go to the consulting level and you get into and they can track specific hotels you've negotiated with and so forth, then you can get a lot deeper into that. So there's a little bit of workarounds, but mainly from the initial TMC book data, you're really looking at number of nights on the road for the hotel information at this point. But we are seeing surcharges. There's a great article out this morning from the company Dime. If you're really interested in the cost of sustainability, they did a good job of addressing some of the costs associated. We've got some European airlines charging SAF fuel charges. We've got hotels adding 10 to 15 a night for their sustainability, but they're putting a concerted effort into it too. They are helping us to reach our sustainability goals, not always free.
Very helpful, thank you. All right, Jerry, so this is a fun question for the Delta man on the phone. But are there specific markets, right, where you would actually encourage, or you think it would make sense to encourage, travelers to take the train versus the plane?
Yeah, we face it every day, but think about some things to keep in mind: network availability and where those trains are operating. In the United States, the rail network isn't as robust as, let's say, Europe. That's hopefully going to change. I'm speaking agnostically over the next 20 years as more investments go into rail, but rail is a complement to travel, if you will, into Europe. We're not taking trains over to Europe right now, so you still have to fly. But Delta actually is developing code-share programs with rail carriers. So think of places like Antwerp and Amsterdam and Brussels, where you're actually flying into AMS, into Schiphol, and then being able to transfer over on a code share to the rail system. So it's something that we're actively looking into, and that actually story came back out in August, and it's something we're going to continuously look into. So if you're thinking of things in the United States, think of the Acela in the Northeast. Customers have a choice, flying out of LaGuardia, or they go into Penn Station and take that up to Boston. So how do we work with some rail systems as they start coming into the United States, keeping in mind distances in order to get to at least that region of the country? So definitely more to come, and we're pretty proud of that first rail code share in Europe, because the air carriers in Europe are, to be honest, probably a decade ahead of us when it comes to sustainability. So they've been thinking of these things for quite some time. And, we're not looking at this from a myopic standpoint either. We're going to partner with Air France, KLM, and our JV partners to really learn about sustainability. And that was a great place for them to help us out there.
That partnership between rail and train and giving your users the best option for sustainability and travel is really fantastic. That's wonderful progress, Jerry, and really supports what you said about it being a priority for Delta and how they're trying to take it directionally.
Ultimately, it comes down to finding solutions for our customers, and also carbon friendly solutions going forward for our customers. And if that's that just seems to be the most carbon friendly way to do it. And then just one more note, I think those were the questions for today, but jumping back to Bella's piece on the event side, Delta's also doing a lot and joining on in the event space. So things that we're doing also, think about QR codes, not having physical paper. I like that she's nodding, she's agreeing with everything so far. No plastic bottles at these events. Think about handing out plastic bottles on your own, even from a cutlery standpoint, things that we're doing on board on the plane. Something I'm really passionate about, getting rid of all of this single serve plastic. Actually, there's a lot of cutlery out there that's available by Bamboo that you'll actually start seeing on Delta planes. But getting rid of all the $1, $2 giveaways, all the plastic goods. If you have a swag bag, it's made out of recycled cotton. We did an event last night. It was made out of recycled cotton. And for crying out loud, have some really good Wi-Fi at these events. So if you're going to have everybody getting onto QR codes, you really need to have some strong signal there. But the event space is really changing. Everything is really changing in this space, and nothing is mutually exclusive. We have to look at sustainability. I'll get on my soapbox for a second. We have to look at sustainability from a real 360 standpoint, from the fuel we put on the plane to the hotels we stay at, to thinking about, do I really need to make that trip, or maybe I can fly better for that trip, to picking the right partners on making that trip. Who am I going to fly? Who am I going to stay with? So thanks for the time on that.
That's great, Jerry. Thank you. We did have a couple questions come in that I'd love to address before today. Camilla, thank you. What factors go into the calculation? Do they differ from the TMC airline travel supplier and the T&E tools? Jerry, Jason, both of you, welcome to jump in on that.
Jason, I guess I'll go first. From a carrier standpoint, when you have a direct relationship, it's based on fuel burn. And so taking through from a route basis, we're able to then calculate what your fuel burn is. Then to convert that fuel burn over to metric tons of CO2, we closely align to the IATA methodology. So Camilla, think of things like average passenger weights with baggage. When you're getting on a flight, we average that. The amount of people on an average flight, so it's called passenger loads. And also, what are the actual cargo weights on that plane? And we can come out with all of those inputs, come out with a metric that then we can apply to your footprint. And it's actually, I don't know if we still had time, Elizabeth, but we did have some examples that we could go over on. That's a nice segue for that.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Give me 1 second.
Yep. So this first example here is actually a company.
Sorry.
You can go to that one. Yep. So this is what you get with Delta if you have a corporate relationship. Because we know your fuel burn, we're able to actually calculate your CO2 burn based on those metrics that I mentioned, those inputs, what your fuel gallon is per passenger. Delta is carbon neutral from a jet fuel standpoint. So I also like to highlight what our investment is in you as a customer, corporate based on if we have your footprint to make your travel carbon neutral. We highlight your top O&Ds on what their footprint is, but also I think everyone on this call can also agree we're in education mode here. And so what does a metric ton even mean as far as CO2? What does that mean in relation to passenger vehicles or acres of forest? And so we're trying to do on the right side there, trying to put it in kind of a visual term or a way to kind of build a bridge to understanding what a lot of these metrics mean. So this is what a typical corporate customer at Delta would get on a quarterly basis from their account representative. And then let's say a customer was interested in doing something about it, besides just being carbon neutral with Delta, taking that next step. And Elizabeth, that next slide there kind of calls out, since we have your footprint, and this is just kind of loaded data here, it's nothing specific to a customer, but just understanding what your goals are. So what we try to do here, you can see that call out by corporate ticket designator and the metric tons of CO2. But a lot of our customers have very specific goals to reduce their carbon footprint by very specific dates. And we try to align that to their footprint. So you can see when this is to purchase SAF or sustainable aviation fuel. And I think we'll make my information available post call. But if there's any customers out there that have a direct relationship with Delta and we have data, we're able to run this analysis for you to see if you wanted to invest in SAF and actually not offset your footprint, but lower or mitigate your carbon footprint on travel with Delta. We're actually able to calculate what it would cost based on your specific goals. So just a snippet of information. I don't want to go too far into it, but just to let you and I give you an idea to reinforce that element of data and that we have it. And if we have the data, we can help you.
Thank you, Jerry. Jason, jump in. And also you might read Julie's question in the chat. That might be something you could speak to.
Sure. So again, a lot of the information that Gary makes available is really where your negotiated and your relationships come into play, right? But again, in order to get that level of detail, you've got to have a corporate contract, you've got to have a preferred booking channel, and a majority of your volume has to go through that, or, you know, have one of the soft dollar programs like Delta's example, Sky Bonus, American, Business Extra, etc. Then you have the ability to get provider data. But when you're doing it without that, you really are at the mercy of looking at the various sources. So the EPA is one, the GHG protocol, which is the greenhouse gas protocol, uses the United Kingdom's DEFRA, or now known as DEBIS standard. And that's really where your customization and reporting can come in. If your school has a metric to say, we want to use this, you can plug that data in once you have your flight data, because all you really need is the class of service, right? The distance flown, and then you can plug in any emissions factor you want. But you've got to have that data in order to make that determination. Some schools have gone as far, because they're unable to require all bookings through a certain channel, come up with a dollar per equivalent, because they only have expense data and they're not able to get that flown segment data just due to the lack of top-down enforcement of something like that. So that's another potential. There's not really a standard, and it has a variable of error, because you're making an associated guess based on the fact that, well, this ticket was $1,000, but it could have been from Boston to New York or Boston to Miami, right? But it was a last minute purchase, where it could have been $1,000 Boston to London, is going to have a higher offset of emissions, even though the cost may have been equivalent. So, and then Julie's question, right, down to, have you worked with companies or universities that charge travelers carbon offset fees? If so, what were those questions used for? I have seen institutions, not necessarily in higher education, but I think I may have one where they do charge an internal carbon tax, quote unquote. And then that goes back to fund sustainable programs on campus. Buying SAF was not, or buying, I think one of their initiatives wasn't necessarily to buy SAF, but it was to buy carbon offsets for their flight volume, or to pay for improvements to sustainable things on campus that benefited the entire campus in a physical way. So back to you, Liz.
Thank you, Jason. Another great question that came in was from Kelsey, talking about the electric hybrid vehicles. Are any of us hearing anything about possible challenges with policies being established on campus? Obviously, just some of the sustainability options are more expensive. So running an electric car, right, versus a standard car, higher price tag, is that reimbursable? Is anyone saying anything around that?
So I'll jump in. Unfortunately, no comment related to the school policies related to electrification. I think in general, obviously infrastructure will drive pricing going forward. It's something that we're seeing across the board. For enterprise, we have clean fleet, and we do utilize through commute electrification on campus. And it just depends on the market that you happen to be in. I would just encourage you to reach out to your local enterprise contact as we're renegotiating based on current availability and where we're headed, to be able to utilize that technology and put it in the hands of a variety of stakeholders as we understand what that will look like to the mobility landscape, but also don't necessarily want to put all of our eggs in that basket. Again, clean fleet and some of the ICE vehicles are here to stay just for a period of time. So again, all that to say, not sure on pricing related to campus policy. For enterprise, it's based on market demand and working with our commute division. And just again, would encourage you to reach out to your local contacts.
Thanks, Claire, for jumping in on that. Appreciate it. All right. Deborah Almondson, thanks for joining in. Deborah, we got some questions from you as well, both around Kelsey's point on the vehicle, so I hope we went there. Deborah specifically asking you, Jason, when does Concur plan on adding CO2 emissions calculation based on the airline equipment versus miles, et cetera?
So again, Deborah, to go into your example, again, so much of what the SAP Concur platform reports on is based on what the carrier is sending to us or to the GDSs. So right now, there is not a global unified standard to say that even though the Airbus A350, as an example, is promoted as a fuel efficient aircraft as compared to, an Airbus 321 or the Boeing 787. Those do have more fuel efficient engines and aerodynamics and all those things, but there's not a calculation necessarily outside of what Gary was showing where fuel burn is calculated. And so again, that's a really hard question to display because we are really content aggregators. I do know that there is a lot of development being pushed towards and working with our partners like Gary and Delta to develop better ways to displaying carbon emissions during the booking process. And we do have some things on our roadmap for what we're calling the Travel to innovation. And I think, I hope that you'll hear more about those things at Fusion next month. But at this point, really, we are at the mercy of both the GDS and the carriers or the providers who are pushing that data at us, and also a global standard to say, what is the burn rate? And that information is kind of proprietary because we don't know passenger loads. We don't know what the mix of fuel is. So it's a really complicated question, Deborah.
Good. The place to start. Thank you, Jason. All right. And then Jerry, you want to jump back in on Dallas's question? In addition to the reporting the airlines provide with a corporate agreement customer, what reporting or information would be available with the new NDC content and distribution?
Yeah, that's an ongoing conversation, to be honest, in that space. And to Jason's point, what is being shared through the channels that fill in that data, and we're working through that on submitting what we need to submit in order to fulfill the requirement for more accurate CO2. But again, there's no getting back to, I think there first needs to be some kind of standardization around calculations. And then we can start as an industry supplying the right information. We need to start there while at the same time developing or prepping the channels to accept that information. It's kind of a little bit of a cart before the horse situation right now. And I can't really give a time frame, but what I can say that it is a high priority, not just for Delta, but just chatting with our distribution leads across the industry.
Learned a lot from all of you today, and I thank you so much for your time. Jerry, Jason, Bella, Claire, Kathleen, it's been wonderful to have you. I think we've gotten through all the questions, and we're coming up to the top of the hour, so we can wrap up the webinar for today, but thanks to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.